So we are about to bring on our first guest, and her name is Kidada Williams. And she is a professor, history professor and author. Her latest book is called I Saw Death Coming, and the subhead is A History of Terror and Survival in the War Against Reconstruction. So, Professor, welcome to Black Authors Matter TV. Can you hear us?
I don't think she can hear us.
Can you hear us, Professor Williams?
She just sent a note saying, should I be able to hear?
Yes. Okay. Thank you, because I didn't see that. I was looking at her. Yes, definitely.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes. We can hear you now.
We can hear you. Can you hear us? No?
I don't think she can hear us.
That's curious.
It must be something on her side, though, I think.
It has to be. I'm not sure what the fix would be if they can't hear us. I want to say, can you log out and log back in?
She's about to do that.
Okay. All right. Well, we are very excited about this weekend coming up. It's coming as a couple of days. We kick it off with the reception that Thursday night, and then it's on for Friday and Saturday. We're looking forward to it being a great event.
It's going to be great.
It's going to be wonderful. We have one book to give away, but we're going to do that in the second half of the show, since we have the two videos we're showing before and after the first interview. So now, okay, Dr. Williams, can you hear me? You can't hear me. Is your volume on your device up? Like on your device, there's volume. There's a volume.
See, sometimes when I have trouble hearing, it's because I accidentally muted the computer and I didn't realize. But she's saying that's not the case.
So where your sound is it at 100% or close to it? On the right, the little headphone, the microphone, the sound button on the bottom right.
She says she's going to test her mic.
Okay, she's going to test her mic. Okay, well, since she's going to do that, that'll take her a minute. And so I want to announce that the book we're giving away tonight is my brand new book, Exodus from Treachery. It is on Amazon. It was released officially last Tuesday, and I already have 3 5-star reviews. So you all who got the early copies, you all have read your books and posted. And the reviews they're posting are very detailed. They're very, very good. So I'm not going to say what the trivia question is yet. We'll deal with that later. But I'm very excited about this book. And also, the previous book, I got the cover redone for the Genesis Files. So it's a companion book. They really match each other now. So I'm going to have them at the festival. So if you come to the festival, you get a signed copy. And this is actually an autographed copy. So I already autographed it. And so when we do the trivia, we will. And she said she was going to test her mic. So let's see. Let's try to see if we can get Dr. Williams to sign. And in the meantime, someone asked if she was using her earpod. Okay, you can hear us now. Okay, wonderful. Okay. Now, can we hear you?
No, now we can't hear you.
Wait, you can't hear me?
Yeah, now we can.
Okay.
That's uncommon for somebody not to be able to hear us.
Yeah.
It's normally on the other end. But welcome to Black Authors Matter TV.
Thank you so much for having me. Sorry about the inconvenience and craziness.
It is okay. These things happen. It's, it's live, it's technology. Right. This is what happens. But we're glad to have you. So thank you for being here tonight.
I'm delighted to be here.
Okay. Now your book is called I Saw Death Coming, and it's a history of terror and survival in the war against Reconstruction. And I know you're a history professor, but just give us a little background on what aspects of history you focus on, because normally when someone gets a doctorate, they zero in on something. It's narrow. The doctorate is on a narrow topic.
Yeah.
So what is your major focus when you did your doctoral work, and what do you teach at you're at Wayne State? Wayne State, okay.
In Detroit.
All right, Wayne State, Detroit. Okay, yeah. Well, wonderful. Yeah. Okay, yes, tell us about your background with the history and what you focus on.
So I specialize in African American history broadly, a lot of it 19th century, but I've sort of done work on slavery, et cetera. I teach courses on African American history. My dissertation was on racist violence. I focused on lynching for the first book. It's a topic that I've been interested in since I was an undergraduate. And this current book looks at an earlier history of white terror and African Americans' experiences of it.
Wow.
Yeah. Well,
that's a lot of layers, actually.
It is. And you said a mouthful, because even though it's not really talked about, or if it is, it's done in a very narrow little box, like it happened to one or two people, like, not that millions were living in terror. That's never the subject of it. So I applaud you for taking a challenging topic, and your title, I Saw Death Coming. What made you use that for your title?
Well, the title comes from one of the survivors who testified before Congress. Mm-hmm. And that was a statement that he made in response to a question of essentially, how did he know, what happened to him? And what he says is that, he looks outside in his yard and he sees this pack of white men coming for him. And so he says, I saw death coming and I got out, because he knew they were coming to kill him.
Wow, that's a statement that sticks with you. It's really striking. And I can imagine the terror that went through his mind as he saw this crowd coming toward him.
Exactly. And the testimony. So what you should know is that African Americans transitioning from slavery to freedom experience this harrowing violence after slavery. We've been given this story that emancipation is this universally triumphant moment. And it is. It's a wonderful moment for Black people. Absolutely wonderful moment for Black people. But it's also followed by this devastating violence.
Yes.
Right. So we've got the celebration of Juneteenth, and yes, we should celebrate the destruction of slavery, but we also need to know what came after. And that, that is the sort of that white backlash, the attacks on Black people for making the most out of freedom. And so those people who were attacked, they reported the violence that happened to them. And eventually a couple hundred of them testified before Congress. Because Congress investigated, and their congressional testimonies from 1868 in the Klan trials in South Carolina, and their participation in the congressional hearings in 1870 and 1871, those form the basis of the sources that I use for this project. So I tell this story about Reconstruction's overthrow and abandonment from the perspective of survivors of the violence. And I use their own words to tell this story.
What your work reminds me of is the Whitney Plantation in Louisiana. If you've ever been there, there's a section where they interviewed all of these slaves after they were freed. And in their own words, they told their stories. So when I listened to you, my mind just automatically went back to all of those testimonials, for lack of a better term, that I was able to read from people who were enslaved at that very plantation.
Right. And those firsthand accounts are precious.
Yes.
Right? Because they tell us so much, not only about the violence, but one of the things I was able to tease out in the story is their efforts to communicate how much they had accomplished in 5 years. You know, so a lot of people start enduring violence, 1867, 1868, and then it really just sort of picks up after that. And when they testify about what happened to them, what they're clear on two things. One, how much they were losing or had lost to the violence already. And that speaks to how much they achieved, how much land they acquired, how much cattle they had, how they reconstituted their families, their jobs, the churches they built, the schools they built, their own businesses. All of their accomplishments are documented in their accounts of this violence. And what's also there is why they were attacked, because they were successful, and what they were losing to the violence and how devastating it was. The testimonies are full of that information, just like the WPA interviews with formerly enslaved people and other accounts that we have of people who endured slavery are so vibrant, and they reveal so much about them as individuals and about the beauty of Black people. These testimonies do the same thing. But they're also filled with the violence, for the WPA interviews, the violence of slavery, for the congressional testimony, the violence of emancipation.
Just thinking about, it's a couple of angles. There are probably many, many angles that you could take this from. But one is that a person who thinks they might have everything they build taken away at a moment's notice may not even try to build, because that takes a tremendous amount of courage and hope to do that in the face of what could potentially happen. And it's a good chance it could happen. It's not like it's a small chance it could happen.
Right.
That's one. But also just the resilience and the hope that people had, and the courage to testify. I'm wondering, did anything happen to the people who testified? Did they may have had to leave town, or okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I want to go back to your first point and highlight the fact that not making the most of freedom was not something that people who lived through slavery were going to do. Right?
Okay.
You don't live through slavery and not reunite your families, try to get as much land as you have, land as you can, to sort of live out all of the dreams, your parents' dreams, your grandparents' dreams, your great-grandparents' dreams for you. You don't just come out of slavery and just do nothing because white people might take it away. That's not who Black people were, right? And so they had been looking at freedom. They've been thinking about freedom. They've been dreaming about freedom for all of their lives.
Yes.
And they see this as their opportunity to make the most of it. And they do that, right? And they are targeted for their success. And, none of them are expecting to be targeted any more than you're expected to be attacked in your house tonight, right? So they are living their best life.
Yeah, and initially the government was backing them
their
up.
hope. Yeah, their hope and that resilience and their belief in the possibilities of freedom. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm saying initially the government was backing them up in the beginning, sort of, but kind of as best you could think they would. They did have some support until they didn't,
Right. And I think that support was always contention. It was always shaky, right?
Yes.
It wasn't as solid as it could be. I think there are people who like to let the government off the hook, and I don't. In the sense that, I think they could have done more. I think that doing more was within their full range of possibilities, but I understand how elected officials own racism. Their own investments in white supremacy shaped what they were willing to do. So we do get the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Black men are able to vote. We get citizenship rights. So we get all of those things. But you can only do so much with them if your rights are not enforced.
It's kind of what people feel like they're going through now, which kind of brings me to my question is, as you were doing your research and writing this story, what parallels between the historical accounts and today maybe struck you most?
Well, I think there is this sort of ongoing white supremacist project. Like the parallels aren't really neat, right? And if you take like a sort of deep dive into the accounts of the violence and people's testimonies, you see how much their worlds are different from ours. And the possibilities, so we still live with the benefits of the world they created. They didn't have that.
Yeah.
They had to do it from scratch. Right. So the parallels are not, they're not neat.
Right.
But I do see the ongoing reality of white supremacy, a willingness to use violence, a denial by a large percentage of the white population about the realities of what's actually going on with this violence, and Black people's ongoing commitment to liberation. So I see those parallels. Like, I recognize that then and now people who've been directly attacked, that they may not have the wherewithal to sort of go forward and fight a larger fight, but a lot of people did, and they do, because they believe in a just world.
Even if they don't agree with you there. I think that's why I've always felt like we are a resilient people, because no matter how things happen or how many steps backward we wound up taking or being pushed back, we always come forward. We always try to have the best for ourselves and try to make sure that we provide the best in our own power, of course, that we can to those after us, our children and their children and so forth.
Right. And that has been, I think, part of that sort of codex of survival handed down through the generations of enslaved people, about our responsibilities to ourselves, to our people, and the debts we owe. We have debts, debts to the people who lived long enough in order to survive slavery, right? And we have a responsibility to build a world that they wanted for us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, one that they could never have imagined.
Exactly. They could not have imagined this. And I think that's why, but they still fought for it, right?
Yeah.
And they fought for, rights and privileges and freedoms that they didn't all get to enjoy themselves. But that's because they believed in us. They believed in our power. They believed in what we were capable of. And they believed in a just world. And so that's why they testified. It was hard for them to testify. They put themselves and their families at great risk in testifying.
Absolutely.
And people were killed. People were killed for testifying. Or they experienced subsequent attacks for having.
Right. I figured that would be the case.
Yes. Yes.
But they
lose everything. They can't live in their home communities. Right.
Right.
A lot of people, they can't stay.
Right. They would have to leave town. There's not as much just discussion or history or about the 100-year period between 1865 and 1965. I'll just put it neatly in 100 years. That 100 years gets overlooked as for what occurred, and that just because slavery ended doesn't mean that we were at 1965. You see what I'm saying? that 100 years, it was still Jim Crow, and there was still, not equal protection.
In other words, people didn't just automatically change their minds about Black people just because the slaves were freed.
Right.
Just like I don't believe, and not that I don't believe people didn't automatically change our lives with the passage of the Civil Rights Movement.
Right.
There is still going to be dangers out there. There's still going to be racism. There's still going to be feelings out there, and that's something that's probably going to be in our world for foreseeable future. I mean, it's getting better, but it's never going to just change.
I mean, we just got to keep fighting for it, right?
I agree.
We shouldn't have to, but
But we can't give up either.
Exactly. You know, I think the other thing I would say is this, you know, there is actually a lot of history written between 1865 and 1965. I think part of it is that a lot of us assume that we already know this history because we know it was, quote, Jim Crow. We don't know what Black people did in and with Jim Crow. And this is the thing, you know, like students who come to my class, you know, that, well, I know Jim Crow, right? And then, you know, and then I get a hold of them, and then they realize all of the things that, you know, 1965, 1964, and 1964, they didn't just magically happen.
Right.
So what part of what we have is we've lost a commitment to understanding the larger freedom struggle, right? So that's what we get from 1865 to 1965 is that struggle for freedom. And that's happening locally, it's happening nationally, it's happening, you know, across the states. They're chipping away at Jim Crow. First of all, we got to deal with the fact that it takes them 25 years to build the Jim Crow system. That Jim Crow system doesn't just magically get installed.
Right.
They've got to build it, and they've got to build it because Black people are doing what they can to hold on to the gains of Reconstruction. Right. And so even after they get that Jim Crow system installed, Black people and their allies are steadily chipping away at it, violations of their rights and violations of their freedom. But I think part of it is that if we assume that we already know this history, then we're not going to be curious. We're not going to open ourselves up to trying to learn what happened. We're not going to look at organizations. We're not going to look at Black women and the club movement and all of the sort of fantastic work they're doing organizing communities, the things they're laying the foundation for 1965. But a lot of times people, they don't know that, or they're not open to knowing that because they assume they know what Jim Crow entailed.
Right. Well, yeah, it's sort of just summarized into that and not the details.
Yeah.
One thing that recently we had Victoria Christopher Murray on the show with her book, The First Ladies, which is about the relationship between Eleanor Roosevelt and Mary McLeod Bethune. And there's so much that Mary McLeod Bethune did in the 40s that allowed the civil rights movement to it's like the prequel, so to speak, to what was going on in the civil rights movement. And it doesn't get as much attention as it should. Victoria does a really good job in that book doing that. So we are at the end of the time for our interview. It was a little shorter, but I want to tell people how they can get the book. And it looks like the cover is right behind you there on the wall.
Yep. All right, this way.
Yeah.
So readers can get I Saw Death Coming anywhere they find books. There's also a great audio book. You can borrow it from libraries, etc.
Wonderful. Well, we did put your link in the chat. So hopefully people will reach out for this book because it's a powerful, powerful testimony to what those of us who came before us went through. And I'm excited to see what the students who study this book take from it, and how they build on it.
So am I. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you so much for being a guest on Black Authors Matter TV.
Take care. Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Okay, good night.